privileges within SRS when you are logged in. There's the Help tab at the top right corner. Just click on that and you can give me a phone call or you can send in a help desk ticket. So the first thing we need to know about advisor publishing through SRS is special education data can come through SRS or your student information system. It always should come from only one source, but never both at the same time. So if you're publishing SPED data from SRS, you should not be publishing it from your student information system and vice versa. Most districts have publishing set up already, but if your district chooses to publish from SRS for the first time, I recommend giving me a call so we can help you get that set up. And accessing advisor records is pretty simple. As long as you have the right privileges within SRS, you'll just go to the Reports tab at the top, and you will select which period you want to work with. So 2020, 2021 is open now, and 1920 is open up again if there's anything that needs to be updated or corrected. You can see 2018, 2019 data, but you can't do anything with it just yet, or if ever again. So here are advisor resources. NDE has shared this already. And there's the link to my presentation in chat, so you can access those documents if you'd like to as well. But everything we talk about is just distilled from these resources. So it's there's a lot to take in, and I've just simplified a lot of it. So this is what an advisor record looks like from last year in the 2019-2020 period. I've outlined the special education setting and the SPED and school hours per week. So the setting code for 10 is public school, and we're not using that in this year anymore. They've been replaced with 20, 21, and 22. And those percentages, these hours per week, kind of got lumped in with the new setting codes, which are right here. So you can find this in that advisor data elements document. And you can kind of take the inverse of these if it helps you understand it better. So if the student's receiving their SPED services at public school, you just need to specify which percentage range they're receiving special ed services or how much they're in regular ed. So whichever way you want to think about it, whether they're receiving SPED services 20% or less of the day or 80%, or if they're in regular ed 80% or more of the day, that's what you're going to want to select. And this comes from the IEP. So this is what the IEP looks like on page 6. This is where you select the primary service and the primary service location. When you select public school, some extra information is going to pop up at the bottom of that IEP form, and it will look just like this. And you'll just select whichever range the student falls into. And I wanted to include what we had last year just to illustrate. I understand this information is actually very useful for anybody that's doing financial reporting. And so this is going to stay within the IEP on SRS. It's just going to be relabeled SPED percentages for financial reporting. So in the years to come, you'll still see this, and that's just a convenience for your district. But for actual advisor reporting, if they are receiving their services at public school, you'll further specify the amount of time they spend with regular ed here. And this is what an advisor record looks like for the 2020-2021 school year. And I've circled the SPED ed setting, which is that new code for 20. And you might notice that the SPED hours and the school hours per week are gone. Other than that, nothing has really changed. So we're just going to run over all of the data elements and where they come from. So everything we see here comes from the Edit Student screen. This is the student's basic demographic information. So this is where you'll find their state ID. If they do exit from SPED, this is where you'll find the exit date and the exit reason. And the placement type is whether they attend public school or a non-public school. And if they do attend a non-public school, there's 3 different codes that kind of explains their non-public placement. And then whether they take alternate assessment is just a simple yes, no. And here we have a screenshot of that edit student screen. I've got a fake student here. It's Harry Potter. This is where you'll find that state ID. It's a 10-digit code, and you cannot save duplicates across the entire SRS system. So if you enter a state ID for one of your new kids and the system tells you that you can't, it's because the student has a duplicate account out there already where the state ID is already saved. So maybe they were at an SRS district several years ago and they transferred to a new district, and the new district just didn't know that they were already in SRS. Just contact me and I'll help you get that sorted out if you run into that problem. And here's that exit date and exit reason. If the student is active, these boxes will be empty, but if they're inactive, the student must have an exit date and an exit reason. And then there's a second page, as you can see. We were on a tab not specified, but if we go to the next one, we were at student info. The second tab is student details. This is where we'll find that placement type. If we click yes for public school student, that equals 0 for the placement type code. Otherwise, if we select the student is no for public school, we'll be prompted to select their non-public placement. And most students will be this one, which equals 3, non-public placement. They're placed by their parents. They're in special education and they receive it from their resident district and are on an IEP. It's a little bit of a mouthful and we'll see it in the next slide. And then down here, we have alternate assessment. And that's a simple yes, no. You might notice that this is grayed out now. Alternate assessment status can only be updated when an IEP gets finalized. That's one of the things you have to talk about in the IEP meeting, and it should only really be determined and changed at an IEP meeting. Okay, and here is the rest of the data elements that are part of the advisor report, and that's the begin date. So for the 2020-2021 period, the earliest begin date possible is July 1st. And most of your students are gonna have that July 1st begin date, and that's because they're carrying over their IEP from the previous year. And then there's the special education setting. We saw that a little bit a few slides ago when we were looking at the IEP. And they both come from page 6 of the IEP and the IFSP respectively. And the level of program participation just means, are they part of IDEA Part B or Part C? And SRS will just fill this out automatically, determined on whether or not the system is getting information from an IEP or an IFSP. And then disability comes from the MDT. And whether the student receives these 3 services is also detailed on page 6 of the IEP and the IFSP. And then the last thing that is just kind of behind the scenes is the initial SPED entry date. And this is the date of the first MDT conference where the student verifies with a disability within the state of Nebraska. So yeah, we'll take a look at the begin date. So this is a screenshot from an IEP. So when the IEP comes into effect, this first date is where the begin date will come from. And then on an IFSP, the meeting date is where we'll get that begin date from. And here's those 3 services and the SPED setting. This is page 6 of the IEP. I did not include the IFSP, I'm sorry. But if the students are receiving any 3 of these services, SRS will detect that and put yes or no on their advisor record. And then we've got a screenshot of the MDT here. You can theoretically check off every disability if a student verifies with it, but the only thing SRS is going to take is what you select as the primary disability down here. So here's an example of an actual, what a typical advisor report is going to look like. As you can see, the begin date is July 1st, 2020. That's because the student was already on an IEP from last year. And it looks like the IEP expired sometime around this date. And this is a great time to talk about SPED 99. Anytime you see SPED 99, it means that the student received an update in their SPED records. So that means they had a new IEP or they had a new IFSP. The previous record expired, it came to a close, and then we started a new SPED record, a new IEP right here. And you can see, looking at everything from SPED setting below, you can see that nothing's really changed. It's just a new IEP that got started. I've redacted the SRS ID and the state ID, so you can't see that. But you might notice these codes right here. This was taken from our test playground where nothing is actually publishing. But if you see an S here, it means that the record was successfully published. If you see a W, you must have just generated an advisor record for the student, or you made an update. So when you make an update or a new record, it's got to wait in line to get published to NDE. If you refresh your page 2 or 3 minutes later, you'll see the W will change to an E or an S depending on whether it's successfully published or not. And of course, E stands for error. And then if you do choose to remove a record because for some reason there's duplicate records or maybe a student doesn't need to be reported at all, you'll just remove the record. And then when you go back to this list, you'll see that there's a D in that result error. And then if you refresh your page again, once things actually process, it will eventually disappear and be deleted. If corrections do need to be made at all to an advisor record, you'll just click on Override Data, and it will take you to a screen where you can edit any data element that is here. And we're going to run through just some really common solutions to common errors. So if you have to correct something from last year, all you'll need to do is go into advisor reports for 2019 and 2020, locate the student in question, and just override their data. I've noticed already that the most common thing you'll want to go back into last year's data for is to exit students. Oops. Yeah, you'll want to come back to last year's data most frequently to exit students that actually exited last year. It's my understanding that a lot of districts don't know if some students are going to return to the district or not, or if the student has transferred somewhere else. And you guys won't really know that until the school year begins. But technically, in Power School, since the student isn't with the district anymore, they're not enrolled in any classes, but they were still active on SRS. So a SPED record will generate for the 2020-2021 school year when it shouldn't. So we want to remove that one and then go back in 2019, 2020 and exit the student. Another one is an invalid begin date or end date. As we can see with this student here, there was just a little bug in the automated systems and the begin date is on April 24th. This would belong in last year's advisor records, and I'm sure if I went back into last year's reports that I would see something like this. What I would want to do in this instance is just override the data and change the begin date to July 1st. And one other note about exit dates is occasionally you might find an exit date that occurs before the begin date. You'll just want to correct those dates so that they make logical sense. And then a state ID is missing. So what you'll want to do for this is there's a quick link that will take you to the student's edit student screen. You can put in their state ID. And then once that's done, you'll come back here and just republish the data. And once you click on republish data, the page is going to refresh itself. And if you go back to the student, you'll see that their state ID is going to be right where it should be. And this one is everywhere right now. 403, student is not associated with your district yet. So if every student in your district has this, there's a good chance that your student information system isn't publishing any data yet to advisor. The way it works for SRS is that special education data can't publish until regular data gets published from the SIS. And if it's not that, then typically, so if your SIS is publishing and you're still getting this error, typically it means that the student just needs to be enrolled in a special program. So when we look at this student, their special ed setting is 16, and I know this is for an early childhood student. So last year, this was a big problem, and I guess it still continues to be a problem. All you need to do in a case like this is to enroll the student in that special program for early childhood in your student information system. And then when things republish, this error should clear. Otherwise, and if it's not that, then we just need to do some investigation. But ultimately, this error, as we see it, just means that something's wrong with the student information system that's preventing SRS from publishing special ed data. And that's a brief rundown of advisor publishing from SRS. I used that 15 minutes pretty well. And if we have a few minutes, I can take any questions.